This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
Keep in mind that Doug Pederson has basically run a balanced offense over the past few seasons, whereas Andy Reid has always been, with very few exceptions, been extremely pass-heavy, and that has essentially peaked out the past couple of seasons. He has Patrick Mahomes, so why bother running the football?
That was Mike Clay a couple of weeks ago right here on 97.3 ESPN. Actually, a week and a half ago, to be hyper-specific for no unnecessary reason. Josh Hennig hanging out with you here on the warm-up. 609-403-0973 is the text board. Yes, it's there for you to get involved in the conversation. Happy Bobby Bonilla Day for those of you who like to celebrate, or maybe you're remorseful about it because you know the Mets are still a dumpster fire because they're still paying off a contract from almost 20 years ago. If it makes you feel any better, the Nets made their final payment to Darren Williams yesterday, after having to pay him 5 years after he left the team. So the Nets are at least out of that deal. Meanwhile, the Mets are still paying Bobby Bonilla. That's got to be the greatest deal ever made by an agent, by the way. Bobby Bonilla gets paid for basically 20-plus years after he stopped playing for a team. That's just incredible. It's a Weinberg Wednesday. Dave Weinberg will be joining the show coming up at 1:25 today. We got a lot to get to with Dave, as usual, on a Weinberg Wednesday. But I wanted to start with the Doug Pederson conversation because we didn't really get a chance to finish it yesterday because of where Adam Kilgore went at the end of our conversation with him yesterday. And I'm really glad that on Football at 4, Mike Gill got to talk to Andrew DiCecco about some of the stuff with that coaching list, because the more and more I digest that ranking list, and the more and more I see the different reactions on Twitter and different social media platforms, the more I'm convinced that I think some people just have a bias against Doug Pederson and the Eagles. I think sometimes there's a perception of the Eagles and Pederson that I think is completely unfair and unnecessary. There's this attitude that, well, you know, if it wasn't for Nick Foles, well, who do you think was calling the plays for Nick Foles? Who do you think was putting Nick Foles in a position to be successful on the football field? Sometimes people will say, well, you know, the Eagles, they haven't done one of the playoffs since they won the Super Bowl. They've also had about 200 injuries since they won the Super Bowl, and they had numerous injuries the year they won the Super Bowl. I think there are some people who just don't want to give Doug Pederson credit because he doesn't fit the mold of the modern, cool, hip, witty head coach in the league. Head coaches today are supposed to be all these innovators and all these geniuses and all these boy wonders, from McVay to Kyle Shanahan to Zach Taylor, Kevin Stefanski. There's this attitude that if you talk a certain way or look a certain way or act a certain way, or you come from somebody's coaching tree, you are automatically supposed to be successful. When we know that in the last 20 years, there's really only one coaching tree that is getting you to the postseason more often than not. And that's the Andy Reid coaching tree. Outside of Andy Reid's coaches, nobody's coaching tree is legitimately overwhelmingly deep or impressive. This idea, when people were literally felt like they were hiring people like Kingsbury and Zach Taylor because they happen to have some sort of connection or worked with or run an offense similar to Sean McVay did, is really ridiculous. I understand that you got to score enough points to win a football game, but at what point are we going to admit that the head coach's job is more than just offensive? And it's more than just putting up a lot of fantasy points for your fantasy football team. There's an old saying, offenses win games, but defenses win championships. There's a reason why they say that. Because you can't name a team in the last decade and beyond who won a Super Bowl who didn't have at least an above average to good, competitive, solid defense able to stop somebody when it's necessary. Drew Brees has had multiple seasons where he's put up insane passing numbers, but yet he has one ring. I don't think that's a coincidence. The only reason why the Rams were competitive with the Patriots in that Super Bowl was because it was so low scoring because Wade Phillips and that Rams defense was stymieing the Patriots just as much for the first three quarters as the Patriots defense was stymieing Sean McVay. And as Mike Gill and Andrew DiCecco talked about yesterday on Football at 4, presented by InsideTheBirds.com, yeah, I have to agree with their point of view. The shine has worn off the McVay and Goff statues of glory.
It definitely did. It certainly seems like teams figured him out a little bit. Like you said, the shine kind of wore off. He kind of took the league by storm with, some of the things and some of the concepts that he was doing and the packages that he had. And now you're starting to see whether it's Jared Goff getting a little bit exposed for the quarterback for his limitations or Sean McVay getting exposed for his limitations.
I have never really been a Jared Goff guy, and I will purely and honestly admit that forever. I'm just not a huge believer in certain guys because to me, Goff was always a guy that I felt like did not have a high ceiling. And you got to give McVay credit. He took a guy who was completely struggling the previous year under the Jeff Fisher curse of quarterbacks, because every quarterback it seems like Jeff Fisher touches implodes at some point. Sean McVay came in, and Jared Goff had a great first season, and he had another very good second season. But I don't think it's an accident that from 2017 to 2019, Goff has thrown more interceptions each year. I don't think it's an accident that Jared Goff went down 2% in completion percentage from 2018 to 2019. And the side effect of that is because of the fact that last year Jared Goff led the NFL in completion attempts. Jared Goff has thrown more passes each and every year as Sean McVay has pushed the offense to go heavier and heavier into the passing game. And that's why I played that cut coming into the show right there from Mike Clay, ESPN NFL Insider. Doug Pederson runs a balanced offense. It's much more balanced than McVay. It's even more balanced than Andy Reid. Now, as Clay pointed out, Andy Reid's got Patrick Mahomes, so let's be realistic. You have Patrick Mahomes, you're going to throw the ball a lot. The guy's a wizard. The guy's an MVP. The guy's arguably the best quarterback in the NFL. He's at least the most talented. I don't think anybody can argue that. Carson Wentz, his rookie year, threw the ball 607 times. The next year, he threw the ball 440 times in 13 games. And arguably, if he would have played the rest of the year, the projections show that Wentz would have thrown the ball probably roughly about 60 to 90 more times. So he would not have hit the 600 mark. What did Wentz have to do last year? He had to throw the ball more. So he got to that 607 mark again. But Jared Goff still threw the ball more. Jared Goff threw more interceptions than Wentz last year. Jared Goff also had a lower completion percentage than Wentz last year. And I don't think that's just because Wentz is a better quarterback. I think it's because the coaching of Doug Pederson is better and more evolved and more able to adjust than McVay. This idea that McVay, because he looks a certain way and talks a certain way and gets media coverage a certain way, doesn't automatically make him this boy genius. It just means that he had a great couple years with a quarterback who looks like he might be regressing. This is the problem that's being faced right now in Chicago with Trubisky. Matt Nagy got to Chicago, took Trubisky, who was a complete mess his first year, and turned him around. But then Trubisky regressed. What did McVay do? He went to Los Angeles, got Goff turned around, had a great couple of years, got to a Super Bowl, and then Goff started to regress. That's not an accident. That is the byproduct of some coaches are not able to evolve. Now, I'm not saying McVay can't figure it out. Look, McVay, I think, is a smart guy, and I think McVay is a guy who can, if he's being honest with himself, can go relook at the tape and try to figure out how he can make the offense evolve. I don't think it's an accident that they let Todd Gurley go. I think they realized that Gurley was breaking down physically, and they had to go in a different direction with the running back position. That's why they've drafted running back a couple times over the last couple of years, because they understood that they would have to evolve the offense. They moved on from Brandon Cooks. They drafted a receiver like Van Jefferson. Now you have not one but two receivers in Cooper Kupp and Jefferson who are both high-level route runners. You're obviously seeing McVay and the Rams organization evolve a little bit what they want to do offensively. So it's not that McVay can't evolve, but so far, as they talked about on Football at 4 yesterday, this is a great point. The league has started to figure out. This is more from Andrew DiCecco yesterday on Football at 4 on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN.
I don't know how you can put him in front of a Super Bowl winning head coach that, aside from 2016, when he really when Doug Pederson has some head-scratching calls, he really has assembled, quality football teams. The players largely play very disciplined style football. That there's a sense of togetherness there. He's a stable head coach. He's, and I really don't know how you can justify putting a guy like Sean McVay over him.
There is no justification. The only justification is that you're projecting that McVay could have a better year. But is that really because McVay is a better coach? Or is it because the roster may have been constructed differently and they're making modifications to what they're doing offensively? I know it's hard to differentiate sometimes between the roster handed to a coach and what a coach does with a roster. But I think it's clearly that Pederson, in the last 3 years, has done more with less than a majority of the coaches in the NFL. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. Dave Weinberg joins us for a Weinberg Wednesday coming up in about 13 minutes from now. When you think about all the injuries the Eagles have had over the last several years, the fact that Doug Pederson has done what he has done in Philadelphia is an incredible credit to him as a head coach. And when you look at all the numbers, the fact that Doug Pederson has had the most offensive snaps in the NFL over the last few years, the fact that the Eagles have gone out there and been a balanced offense, the reality that Doug Pederson is not predictable from week 1 to week 16. Yeah, there are times in October and November we all get frustrated with the play calling. We have questions about it. But it's not a coincidence that Doug Pederson, over the last 3 years, has gone 11-2 in December. Because Doug Pederson, throughout the year, realizes that he may have to do things differently, partly because of injuries, but partly because of the fact that Doug isn't, naive. He played in the league. He understands that you can't 100% do what you did week 1 to week 16. So by the time December comes along, Doug Pederson reaches back and brings you some new material to the table. He brings you something better, something different, something more evolved. And I think there's a huge part of Doug Pederson having played in the NFL that has aided him in being a head coach. And it's not to say you have to play in the league or you have to play football to be able to coach. It's saying that there is something that Sean McVay, something that Zach Taylor, something that some of these other coaches around the league who did not play the amount of time, or if at all, in the NFL like Doug Pederson did that aids him in being able to communicate with the players, put them in a position to be successful, that some of these other coaches are not able to do. And again, it's not to say that McVay or Shanahan or Zach Taylor or Cliff Kingsbury can't evolve and can't grow. But everybody was enamored with Chip Kelly coming out of college to the NFL. And that first year, he got the Eagles to the playoffs, and everybody was all excited. But Chip Kelly regressed every year after that. The team regressed every year. He demanded control of the roster, and then the roster regressed and deteriorated. And then he was fired. And now he's been run out of the NFL. And he's so unpopular now that his own players at UCLA apparently don't even trust him. 30 players got together and said, hey, we don't trust you with these COVID-19 protocols, Chip Kelly. I mean, the dude literally went from being the superstar of sports to not even being trusted by 30 players on his own college football team at UCLA. UCLA is not even a powerhouse. But that didn't happen to Doug Pederson. Doug Pederson didn't come in here and light the league on fire. As Andrew DiCecco said in the earlier cut, Doug struggled a little bit his first year. But he learned from that experience, and he grew, and he evolved. And I think that's one of the problems with the world today. We don't always appreciate the guy who learns from his mistakes and grows. We assume that you have to go out there and be great. Week 1, week 4, you got to start off hot. You got to get up and going. If you're not getting off to the fastest start, you have no chance of winning the race. Coaches, players, they come out of the gates, they're on fire, and we make the assumption, oh man, this guy's great. But we forget that that's not the only way to vindicate success. That's not the only way to win at the highest level of professional sports. Peyton Manning led the NFL in interceptions his rookie year. He's still a Hall of Famer all these years later. Steve Young struggled mightily with the creamsicle Tampa Bay Bucks before he got to the 49ers and got under Bill Walsh's tutelage. You don't have to be great day one, year one. There's plenty of head coaches in NFL history who did not have a great first year, and they still went on to have success. Whether it's Bill Walsh, whether it is Bill Parcells, Andy Reid, Bill Belichick. Not all of these coaches are superstar among the best year one or even their first go-around. Belichick and Pete Carroll both failed in their first coaching stints, had to get fired, had to go somewhere else, reestablish themselves, and then return to be head coaches and be successful. Andy Reid got the Eagles to a Super Bowl, but he had to get the right quarterback with a new team in order to win a Super Bowl. Just because Sean McVay and fill-in-the-blank coach may have a great first year is not always a prerequisite for having a great career. And to me, that is the biggest difference between Doug Pederson and these other coaches that may or may not get ranked ahead of him. It's not just winning the Super Bowl. It's not just that Pederson is really good at his job. It's the fact that he did not stand put after year one or year two. He's continued to grow. He's continued to evolve. And he's had a balanced offense. He's not going super crazy. He's adjusted to when the quarterback gets injured. He's adjusted when he's lost his wide receivers. He's adjusted when he's lost offensive linemen. Doug Pederson has adjusted better than these other coaches. It's on these other coaches, in my opinion, to catch up to Doug Pederson. And they still have time. I don't think Cliff Kingsbury or McVay or Shanahan or Zach Taylor are going to be fired anytime soon. I think they're all pretty secure in their jobs as long as they keep progressing and they keep making progress and they keep showing that they can make steps forward. I just think that we don't give Pederson enough credit because he doesn't fit the stereotype of the modern head coach. I'm Josh Hennig. Warm up here on 97.3 ESPN. Again, text board is open, 609-403-0973. Reminder coming up about 5 minutes from now. A Weinberg Wednesday. Dave Weinberg joins the show. Let's hit the text board right now, 609-403-0973. Dan from EHD chimes in and says, let's not label the Rams anything just yet. Maybe they had a Super Bowl hangover. 9-7 is the same as the Eagles. Well, before I go to the rest of your text, Dan, let's address that real quick. I'm not denying they couldn't have had a Super Bowl hangover. That happens to a lot of teams, especially teams that lose Super Bowl. There's a long history of if you lose the Super Bowl, you're probably going to have a rough next year. But just the 9-7 that the Rams had is not the same 9-7 as the Eagles. As I mentioned, Doug Pederson is 11-2 in December. Sean McVay is 9-6 in December. That's a huge, massive difference. In the postseason, Sean McVay's teams are averaging in the postseason 18 points per game. Doug Pederson's teams in the postseason average 22.2 points per game. That's a big difference. And that is usually the difference between winning and losing, by the way. That 4 points is a huge gap. It's not the same 9-7. Doug Pederson has had to work through more adversity than Sean McVay has. Yeah, Sean McVay had injuries last year, but Doug Pederson has injuries every single year. And I understand that people look at the Rams and say, well, Cooper Kupp was injured, Gurley was injured. They were. And McVay didn't adjust accordingly. And Jared Goff was unable to evolve accordingly. Again, Jared Goff goes from 7 interceptions to 12 interceptions to 16 interceptions. That's a problem. That's an issue that I think you have to not ignore. To me, interception to touchdown ratio is one of the biggest comparisons in all of sports because it tells you how efficient or not efficient a quarterback is. And by the way, Jared Goff has fumbled the ball 22 times in the last 2 years. We've talked in the past on here about Carson Wentz and his ball security issues. It's not like Goff is exactly securing the ball himself. I have a lot more trust in Kirk Cousins keeping the ball secure than I do Jared Goff. We'll get back to more text coming up in just a bit. 609-403-0973. Want to remind you, we got another Seize the Deal opportunity for you this week. 97.3 ESPN giving you another opportunity, this time for the Rife Bar and Restaurant in Atlantic City this Friday. You can get a $25 voucher for $12.50. That's right, for half the price. And let me tell you something. I got a sneak peek of this food. The burgers, the wings, the scallops. Holy Toledo, this stuff smells amazing. It looks great, and it tastes even better. So do not miss out on this Seize the Deal opportunity. Rife Bar and Restaurant in Atlantic City. $25 voucher for just $12.50. Thanks to Seize the Deal. This Friday, for more information, go to the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Dave Weinberg, next.
You have to respect what Doug Pederson has done the last 2 years in terms of lugging that Eagles team into the playoffs when all appeared lost. So you can't rule that out.
Dan Graziano and ESPN's Get Up a couple days ago. Eagles, Doug Pederson talk, it just doesn't go away. So it's convenient that it's a Weinberg Wednesday. Dave Weinberg covered the Eagles for over 26 years now, has seen all iterations of the Eagles franchise and head coaches. So we'll talk with him about that and other things right now on the Boardwalk on the Hotlines. We do every Wednesday here on 97.3 ESPN. Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So, this is going nuts the last couple of days. This guy puts out a list, and everybody freaks out about it because somebody's higher, somebody's lower. But, I feel like, Dave, one of the problems is that when it comes to a guy like Doug Pederson, because he's not the modern-looking coach, he doesn't talk like a smooth operator. He doesn't look like a model like Sean McVay. He's honest, he's folksy, he's a little older, he's not polished around the edges, that sometimes he doesn't get the respect he deserves when realistically, this guy has done more with less than more than 90% of the league.
Yeah, you're right there. I mean, I don't understand it at all. I don't think that looks or mannerisms or folksy background or whatever, that should have no bearing on how people rank, football coaches. The bottom line is wins and losses and success. And Doug delivered the Eagles' first Super Bowl victory in franchise history and had them in the playoffs the last 3 years in a row. I mean, there's no way that he's not at least in the top five, in my view.
Yeah, for those who didn't see it, the list from the guy from CBS Sports will remain anonymous because it doesn't matter. He put Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan ahead of Doug Pederson on the list. By the way, he put him ahead of Pete Carroll as well. So it shows you there's a lot of modern recency bias in projecting head coaches toward the future. When realistically, Dave, I just think that to me, and maybe I'm wrong. I'm not saying I'm right about this, but to me, the only job of the football coach is to win games and to get you in the position to win a championship. And I think Doug has done an incredible job from not having the best 2016 to evolving and growing and turning himself into, as you mentioned, in the conversation for one of the top 5 head coaches in the league.
Yeah, I think there might be some sort of bias because he wasn't Jeffrey Lurie's top choice back in 2016. He was just, everybody wanted Adam Gase or Ben McAdoo or, some other, and Doug was kind of like the fallback almost. But, since he's been here, he's done nothing but been successful. I mean, he struggled a little bit at the outset, finding his way a little bit as a head coach. But, from 2017 on, there's no getting around the fact that he's been, nothing short of amazing in terms of not only the wins and losses, but, the players that he's had with him to accomplish those things. I mean, all the injuries and controversies and what have you for him to bind that team and bring them together in time to win the ultimate prize. I mean, there's just no getting around his success.
Also, Dave, what does it say to you that Doug Pederson is, since 2017, 11-2 in December?
Right. I mean, good coaches do that. They're the ones that have their team playing at their best when it matters most. Granted, there's something to be said. You should be able to get out of the gate relatively well too, so you don't have to rely on December to win division titles and what have you. But the fact that he's been able to be in that position and to make the most of his talent, like we mentioned, all the injuries and all the setbacks that they've had, through the course of the season, to be able to bring teams together, new quarterbacks, new cornerbacks, running backs that I've never really seen significant time. Just to be able to do all that and to get into the playoffs year after year after year is just that's just an incredible accomplishment in my view.
Another point you just brought up, I want to expound upon that. You mentioned the defense as well. There's something to be said for the relationship between Doug, who runs the offense, and the defensive coordinator, Jim Schwartz, whereas some of these other teams, they've gone through defensive coordinators, they've gone through GMs, they've had some changes around said head coach. I think there's something to be said, Dave, for the fact that Doug has a good working relationship with the other people around him who have specific jobs, like the GM, like the defensive coordinator.
Oh, yeah, absolutely right. I mean, that chemistry is of the utmost importance when it comes to building a franchise. And you're right. I mean, Doug's relationship with Howie Roseman, with Jim Schwartz is strong and solid. They respect each other. They listen to each other. And, there's a lot to be said for that. You're right. There are a lot of teams where, there's that friction and, people drawing apart, having different philosophies, strong egos, which I guess you kind of have to be in that position. But by the same token, Doug and Howie and Jim are willing to set all that aside for the good of the team, and that's the results you've seen in the last 3 years.
Dave Weinberg joining us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline for a Weinberg Wednesday here on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at Dave Weinberg19. Check out his extra point columns at 97.3ESPN.com. Dave, to switch it up a little bit, I know how much you love golf. I know how much you enjoy watching the PGA Tour. And I want to get some more thoughts from you about, where the PGA Tour is. They did have some positive tests, and some of the players were critical of how the PGA Tour has handled how some of the other players, some of their own colleagues have handled some of that. I want to get your thoughts on all that.
Well, yeah, it's been a source of controversy. Like, you're right, they have some positive tests. Things probably haven't gone as smoothly as they had hoped, but I kind of think that they did they've followed the right protocols for the most part. I think there's been some tests involving caddies where players have withdrawn. It hasn't all been players that have tested positive, but no, I can understand the players' apprehension and concern. But if you don't want to be out there, then don't go. This is your livelihood. This is how you make your money. This is how you make your living. I think they've, for the most part, the PGA has done the right thing by them as far as the social distancing protocols, that kind of stuff. So. I'm hoping that they're going to be able to weather the storm, so to speak, and to be able to continue with the season. Because you're right, I'm a huge golf fan, and I really enjoy watching the best players in the world go at it.
I'm going to reappropriate a question from Mike Gill from yesterday and ask it to you, and that is, how have you felt about the actual product of the sport? How it's looked on TV, how it's been presented. I mean, I know me personally, I think it's hilarious when the F-bombs drop on TV, and then a guy like Jim Nance is like, well, that just happened. Like, to me, stuff like that entertains me. But, I'm not the diehard golf fan like you are. I'm more of the casual guy. So I want to get your perspective on all that.
No, I really enjoy it too. I'm not one of those guys that is kind of like the stickler for the prim and proper atmosphere around golf. Shirt tail tucked in, hat coming off after the round. You can't do this, you can't do that. A player is disqualified if he doesn't properly take the drop, that kind of stuff. None of that stuff, affects me at all. I'm all about the more personal you can make it, the more fun. Then have at it. When you have engaging personalities like Phil Mickelson and those guys, like you mentioned, using colorful language, trash talking. I just think that makes the sport even more enjoyable to watch. Personally, so the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I think also, when we have a chance to humanize these athletes, to kind of, take away some of the, the idolization of them and say, hey, these are people like you and me. They just happen to be really good at what they do. I think that also draws the audience in a little bit as well.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And the more you can let their personalities come through, show the human side of things, who among us hasn't dropped a four-letter word or two on the golf course? I'm certainly guilty of it. And, I try to not to throw clubs and that kind of stuff. But, I've been known to change my language when I miss a putt and that kind of stuff. So, the fact that they're human and, they get upset and they have fun when, on the golf course as well. I think that's really good for the sport. I don't see any downside to it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to be Happy Gilmore, but just show a little personal side. Right. That's all.
Right, exactly right.
What do you think about the fact that they're looking at the opportunity to possibly get fans back at the PGA Tour? Looks like it would be around end of July. Do you think that's a good idea?
If you'd asked me that a week ago, I would have said yes. Now I'm not so sure. With the way states or delaying openings, even with what you're seeing in Atlantic City, where they've and New Jersey. I mean, they've decided not to open indoor dining. You see the Borgata not opening at all because their amenities aren't available to their customers. I think that there's given the spikes and stuff in the cases that you've seen recently, maybe adding fans is probably not the best way to go. I'm really concerned about the ShopRite Classic. And you're speaking of golf, that's the number one spectator sport in our area year after year. And to have that tournament, it would be great if they have the tournament regardless. But it's going to be tough if their fans aren't able to watch that. It's going to be interesting to see what happens later in the year if they're able to at least flatten the curve a little bit more.
Does it at least feel like that because you mentioned the ShopRite LPGA that it's so much further down the road? Today is July 1st. That
right.
You're talking about the end of September. Does the distance give you hope that maybe we could see things change, or do you feel like maybe it's just better to be safe than sorry and plan accordingly?
Happy Bobby Bonilla Day, by the way.
Yes, happy Bobby Bonilla Day.
I think there's probably enough time to where I can be cautiously optimistic that maybe they'll be able to find a way to allow fans to attend it. I'm not ready to give up on that yet. From a personal standpoint, I go in this race called the Escape the Cape Triathlon every year in Cape May, and it starts by jumping off the ferry and swimming to the shore. And it was supposed to be June 14th, and they delayed it to August 30th. There was a time where I was kind of hopeful that they might be able to do it, but now I just don't see how there's enough time there, to be able to cram 1,500, 1,600 people onto the ferry. That just doesn't make, that's just not feasible to me right now. But, for golf, for the ShopRite Classic being a little bit later than that, I think there might be still time to find a way to get the spectators out at Seaview when the time comes.
Weinberg Wednesday here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN with Dave Weinberg. Dave, let's spin it local here. I know you were disappointed about Matt Caesar not making the Phillies, taxi squad. So, what do you think is next for Caesar? Because we know that he was a part of the Cubs World Championship team. He's had a career where he's basically been a utility guy around baseball. But it has to be disappointing for him not to make the local team, the Phillies.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I mean, Matt, when he grew up as a Phillies fan, and to be able to play for your hometown team, that's kind of that's a big deal for any player in any sport. Now that he doesn't have that opportunity, I'm a little curious as to. I think he still has a future in baseball, only because I think one of the reasons that he didn't stay with the Phillies was the fact that they instituted the DH for the National League, and as a Matt's known as one of the top pinch hitters on the team and now in the league, and now that's basically been taken away. I mean, you're not going to have nearly as much pinch hitting as you did in the past. So I think that really hurt his chances. But maybe next year, if hopefully the National League reverts to having pitchers hit, which I think I'm more of a traditionalist, I guess, in that sense. And if that's the case, I think Matt really has a chance. And I feel bad for him because he was really healthy. Or healthier for the first time in a couple of years, and I thought he had a real shot at making the team, or at least starting the season in AAA and then maybe being promoted later in the year. So I know it's a tough blow for him, but on the other hand, he's 30 years old now. Just had a son, and he's very popular with as far as his charitable work, his artwork, and that kind of stuff. So maybe he's at the point where he doesn't really need baseball anymore, but I still think he has a couple more years left in him if he can just get that opportunity to prove it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dave, keeping it local. So I feel like you're one of the only people I could have this little conversation with, you being Mr. Cape May. So I was
okay.
I was watching the movie Ford versus Ferrari. I finally got a chance to watch it last night. And one of the points in the movie is when Mr. Ferrari sends the message back to Henry Ford II saying, basically saying, you're no Henry Ford. And it immediately brought me back to, many, many years ago when I was a senior in high school back in 2004. I read an article about how Henry Ford raced.
Many, many years ago, seriously.
Well,
graduated in 1976.
Touche. But it brought me back to a piece that I wrote when I was younger about how Henry Ford himself actually raced on the Cape May Beach.
Yep.
And how
Yes,
Henry Ford part of the reason why he had the money to do it was because he promised a local person in South Jersey that he would make him the first Ford dealership. He would finance him to be able to race on the beach. And he raced against Louis Chevrolet and Walter Christie, two of the bigger names. So, Cape May, it's a town of a lot of history, Dave, but it's also got a history in terms of the sport of racing as well.
Yeah, that's a really. I mean, I knew about him racing cars on the beach. I didn't realize all the history behind it, though. That's really cool. But yeah, Cape May goes back, centuries and centuries as far as, the history. There's been presidents that have stayed here, diplomats, what have you. It's a really cool town that, was chock full of Victorian architecture, plus, modern amenities too. And it's just it's the best of both worlds. I was very, very fortunate to be able to grow up in Cape May and, made the decision to make my permanent home here. And, I'll encourage anybody, I'll put Cape May up against any other town, in the Jersey Shore, but, even the entire state as far as, atmosphere, vibe, food, outdoor activities, beaches. I just think it's tremendous. And maybe I should be the king of Cape May or something.
Well, at least you're the ambassador to me. That's how I look at you sometimes.
There you go. Yep. I never had a bad thing to say.
By the way, just
parking tickets every once in a while.
I remember that last summer. Here's a little tidbit for you, Dave, and that is, so the car that Henry Ford raced on the Cape May beach, it was called the Beach Skimmer. It got taken out by a wave of water. That's why he came in last in the race. And the changes he made to the skimmer eventually became known as the Model T that was sold in the United States.
Wow, that's awesome. Oh, how about that? So it was a rogue wave in Cape May that led him to develop the Model T, huh?
Yeah, basically the damage that the vehicle took led him to make specific modifications, and that led to the Model T, which was then sold at the first Ford dealership in America in South Jersey.
Wow, how about that? That's awesome.
I'm full of useless information, Dave, so I got that going for me.
No, that's really interesting.
He's Dave Weinberg. Follow him on Twitter at Dave Weinberg19. Check out his extra point columns at 973ESPN.com. And he joined us today, as always, each and every Weinberg Wednesday on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Dave, appreciate your time as always.
Oh, thanks a lot, Josh, and thanks for the history lesson.
Well, listen, I learned from you. You can learn from me, and, makes everybody better, right?
There you go. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dave. Josh Hennig here, the warm-up 97.3 ESPN. Back to your text messages next at 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation right here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Josh Hennig, the warm-up right here on 97.3 ESPN, leading up to the Sports Bash with Mike Gill. With Football at 4 today is Jeff Mosher. Join Mike Gill, Football at 4, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. I want to remind you that Seize the Deal, this week's opportunity, this Friday, 9 a.m., you get a $25 instant voucher to Rife Restaurant and Bar in Atlantic City for just $12.50. That's right. The Seize the Deal opportunity this week. $25 for just $12.50. Half off for the Rife Bar and Restaurant in Atlantic City. Mahi tacos, hangover burgers, bone-in chops, seared scallops. I've seen the food. I've smelled the food. I tasted the food. And I'm telling you, the food is more than worth this deal. A $25 voucher for $12.50. Do not miss out on this Seize the Deal opportunity this Friday for the Rife Bar and Restaurant in Atlantic City. For more information, hop on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app or 97.3 ESPN.com. Josh Hennig here, 609-403-0973. Promise to get back to a couple texts before we get out of here. Dan from EHC followed up a little bit ago and said, I bleed green, but the reality is if the Eagles go 9-7 again for a third straight year, there has to be serious questions. Then he types serious in caps again. Well, here's the thing. And I understand where you're coming from, Dan. And I'm not discounting the point. And I understand that, Jeffrey Lurie said, that 10-6 is not good enough and all that stuff years ago. But not every 9-7 season is equal. You can go 9-7 and make the playoffs one year and go 10-6 and miss the playoffs another year. Until they expand the postseason, which there's talk that they might not do that this year. They might push it back to next year because they're going to have the extra week on the calendar, at least plan to. I mean, if we're going to have an NFL season. But the point is that until you expand the playoffs out and you allow more teams in, and even then there's no guarantee, you can have a 9-7, 10-6 year and either make or miss the postseason. The ultimate goal is to reach the playoffs. And I understand you're a diehard Eagles fan and you look at that 9-7 and it makes you scratch your head. But how many years did the Bengals go to the playoffs under Marvin Lewis and they couldn't win a single daggone game? I mean, Marvin Lewis got his team there and couldn't even win. Doug Pederson is getting his team to the playoffs and more often than not winning. And last year, they still had a chance at beating the Seahawks with a quarterback with a torn hamstring, missing half of your offensive line, at home in the link with a wide receiver core who your best receiver was actually probably Josh Perkins, and he's a tight end. That's what Doug Pederson was working with last year. I can't hold the 9-7 seasons against him because let's be realistic. It's not identical having 9-7 with a mediocre team and a 9-7 with a team that is basically your practice squad on the field. I think there has to be something said for the fact that if Doug's getting you to the playoffs and usually is winning playoff games, I don't think that's an issue. I think the issue is if you keep going 9-7 and you're not making the playoffs, then I'd be a little bit more concerned. But Doug is still getting there. Doug is still getting you into the postseason. Doug is having a run of success in Philadelphia that's only been rivaled by Andy Reid. And the reason why Doug's success is better is because Doug won the ring and Reid didn't. Reid got to the NFC Championship game and lost to a bunch of teams and finally got over the hill. Doug got there, won the ring, and he's been in the playoffs 2 straight years ever since. We mentioned the Super Bowl hangover. The Eagles didn't have a Super Bowl hangover. The Eagles had a Super Bowl infirmary. The next year, they just couldn't stay healthy, and they kept getting re-injured. Remember, Wentz tore his knee, then broke his back. I mean, it was a complete disaster.